And good afternoon, and welcome to today's webinar on emergency response in Ukraine with our partners from Medical Teams International. I'll be saying a little bit more about today's program in just a minute. My name is Derek Olson, and I'm the president of World Oregon. Thank you for joining us for today's program. Today is a webinar that is being recorded for posting on YouTube later. As for those of you who have participated before, the webinar, as a participant, you will have your audio and video off. You can ask questions in the Q&A, and we may post in the chat links of interest to you. So again, questions, please direct them to the Q&A when you have questions for our participants. We have a busy next couple of weeks here at World Oregon as part of our programs connecting you with hot topics from around the world. I'm going to post in the chat the link to our events page. There are numerous programs, including one tomorrow at noon on Iran and the protests there, Women, Life, and Freedom, Perspective on the Protests in Iran. Next week on the 13th, we have NPR's correspondent Frank Langfit giving a noon presentation on a dispatch from London about the UK and the EU and all that excitement. And then our last program before we break for holidays is Christopher McKnight-Nichols talking about ideology in U.S. foreign relations. Many of you will remember him for the multiple programs we've done with him when he was at Oregon State. He's now at the other OSU, the Ohio State University, and we're still a great partner with him and Oregon Historical Society. So again, the link in the chat to events on our page has the ability to register for all of those events. I would note these are all free webinars. Our ability to bring these webinars to you is free for your attendance is due to the strong support we have from you and foundations and others in the community who support us. We would ask that while they are free, we'd like you to consider making a gift to our end of year campaign. And I'm posting here in the chat a note that you might have seen that we post at the bottom of each registration page, which talks about the challenging situation, as everyone can, I think, understand, given inflation and the uncertain economy. And so to make these programs free as much as possible, we appreciate greatly your support. On a related note, if you feel so moved to support the incredible work that Medical Teams International is doing, not only in Ukraine, but other parts of the world, I'm posting in the chat the link to the Medical Teams Donate page. They are an excellent organization who works in multiple parts of areas in crisis and also here in our neighborhood through mobile dental teams and others, and you may wish to support them as well in this season of giving. And now I'd like to turn to today's program. Again, today's program is Emergency Response in Ukraine on the ground with Medical Teams International. And we're thrilled to have Joe DiCarlo, who serves as Medical Teams International Global Ambassador and also serves on the World Oregon Board of Advisors. He has 20 years working with Medical Teams International, leading dozens of disaster response in multiple areas around the world. And he'll be starting things off in just a minute, followed then by Patty Hutton, who is a response specialist at Medical Teams International, and she's specifically focused on supporting the Ukraine response. She's worked on various other crises in Iraq, Haiti, Southeast Asia, Southwest Africa, and has a great deal of experience with Medical Teams International. Encourage you to engage with the program, post your questions in the Q&A, and without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Joe. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you, Derek, and thank you everyone for joining this afternoon. When you look at the world today, there seems to be a crisis everywhere. And you may have the question, well, how does medical teams decide to respond to a certain situation? Why are we going to Ukraine and not to other areas around the world that have great need? And so I just want to give you a picture of our thinking and our processes in making a decision. And we look at three specific areas in deciding whether to respond or not. The first and foremost is need. Is there a need that is of the scale that will need a response from an organization like medical teams? And can medical teams bring the services that are needed in that situation? So we first look at the need of the crisis based on the crisis. Secondly, we look at access. Do we have ability to get to the areas, to the people who have the greatest needs? Do we have visas or other requirements, logistical issues that may prevent us from getting there? So we look at need, we look at access, and then we look at the resources that are available. Are we, and I'm not only speaking of financial resources, but also human resources and materials and supplies. Can we gather all that together in order to have a coordinated response? And when you're looking at Ukraine, of course, we were on February 24th, we were horrified to see the invasion starting, and we knew that people were going to be leaving the country, either displaced in the country or leave as refugees outside of Ukraine. The numbers were astronomical very quickly, the largest migration of people in Europe since World War II. And we immediately went into action. We first started by going into Poland, and we had some context there to look to see where there might be a spot for medical teams. We sent an advanced team of staff and volunteers in order to assess that and to draw up a plan. We knew that many of the refugees were going into Poland, and that's where we started. But as we began to get more experience in the region, it became clear to us that the best place to locate was in Moldova, a small former Soviet republic that borders with Romania. And we're not new to Moldova. Medical teams actually for almost 20 years had been working in Moldova since 1979. And we were involved in establishing a registration in the country. We were able to develop a team of local Moldovans in order to implement programming. And so when we finished in 2016, it was natural for us to make contacts there again. Moldova also made sense to us because it was the poorest country in Europe. It is not part of NATO. It is not part of the European Union. And so its resources were less than the other surrounding countries. And so that's where we landed and began to work with refugees coming into Moldova from Ukraine. I just want to share a few facts about Ukraine that maybe we lose sight of. And the first one is that Ukraine is the second largest country in Europe, only behind Russia. And secondly, if you look at the Ukrainian flag, you see the blue and the yellow. And the blue represents the blue sky, and the yellow represents the rich fields, the agricultural nature of the country. Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe and the world. And so when we're looking at disruptions occurring because of this war in Ukraine, the impact is not just on Ukrainians and on Europe, but it's also the impact far reaches throughout the world, including food and food distribution and the access to food. Because of the war, it's been curtailed. This is especially being felt in the Horn of Africa, where food malnutrition rates are astronomical. They're increasing in the millions, and where food, if it is available, that the price of food has been increased. So I just want to point out, as we talk about Ukraine and talk about the war there, the impact of this war is worldwide. Patty, why don't you tell us more specifically about what Medical Teams is doing in Ukraine?
Sure. So right now, our current programming, we have 2 free pharmacies that we have in Dnipro, which is in the east side, and then also in Izmail, which is in Odessa Oblast. And similar to what Joe was talking about earlier, these are the needs that we saw as we, like I landed in August, and so we decided to move from the West more to the East where there's more needs. And what needs did we see that needed to be addressed? And so one of those was pharmaceuticals and medicines. So people couldn't afford them. And that was one thing that got very, very expensive in Ukraine after the war started. So one way was for us to have free pharmacies. And another thing that we're currently doing is working with local partners for shelter NFI non-food item distributions. So those include blankets and winterization kits, which include pillows and blankets and bedding and different things like that. And then we've also distributed 20 generators to health clinics and so that they can continue to see patients over the winter and still have heating and electricity. And we also have a plan to distribute more of those, about 100 more. They're definitely in need. So as well as a MHPSS program, so mental health and psychosocial support program that we have in both of our bases as well, in Dnipro and in Ismail. So those teams go out to different communities and do psychological first aid, as well as just group sessions when it comes to mental health and psychosocial support. So those are the projects we have going on right now. Yes.
Thank you, Patty. I was in Moldova from April and May, and last April, May. And as a Russian speaker, I felt honored to be able to listen to the stories of the Ukrainian refugees in Moldova. And I knew that they were moving from one uncertainty to another, because most people, they just want to go back home. But what struck me in listening to their stories, and many people wanted to share their story with me, but what struck me was the sense of shame that they felt in leaving the country. Shame in the sense that they left their husbands, their fathers, their grandfathers to fight in the war while they left the country for safety. This is causing tremendous, as Patty had shared, the psychosocial impact it's having. Not only are they experiencing war and the separation that has caused, they're also feeling a sense of shame in what to do. Should they go further into Europe, or should they wait and hopefully be able to go back home? I'm frequently reminded of a poem by a British Somali poet, Washan Shire, where she says, no one leaves home unless home is the mouth of a shark. You only leave home when home won't let you stay. This is truly the situation in Ukraine. People want to go back home to their own language, to their own communities, their own culture. They feel like they're foreign in this strange place that they're forced to go into. No one leaves home unless home is the mouth of a shark. And they are certainly experiencing that.
Very much agreed, Joe. And I think part of that is also the uncertainty. Like, I think that is one thing I've noticed a lot from the beginning. You just don't really know what's going to happen, or we've talked a lot about it being a cold winter, but until you get there and you experience what that's like, without having moments that you don't know when they're coming without power, it's all very uncertain, even from an outsider's perspective, and of me not living there or being from there. That's really difficult.
So, greetings. This is Tim DeRoche, the director of programs here at World Oregon. I'm going to jump in and maybe move the conversation around a little bit with questions. And you hinted at a couple things I want to dig into a little bit more, Patty and Joe. One is you referenced the shame that people are feeling and carrying with them. And I'm curious more, like, what are the people you're offering care and aid to telling you, and what do they want? What do they want us? What do they want the world to know about what is happening currently?
From my perspective and what I've heard, they want the world to know that they are more than just a refugee, that they were living a life, a normal life. They want their own identity. They want the world to know what's happening to them, and they want peace, so that they can go back home. I think it's important to realize that they're not looking to go to Germany. They're not looking to go to, the UK or anywhere else for economic reasons. They are looking to live their lives peacefully as Ukrainians, and they want to make sure that they're able to keep the integrity of their nation.
Great. And Patty, you referenced the coming winter, and we keep hearing about this. We hear about this not only with Ukraine, but with people who are living through all the transition in Afghanistan. It is expected to be a harsh winter, certainly more harsh if one doesn't have stable support systems. What are you doing to prepare for continued response during what could be a very hard winter for people?
Yeah, I think with MTI, we thought about this back in August, even when it was very warm and I was sweating everywhere I went, that, okay, what can we do now to start procuring things so we can have them? We know it's going to be a hard winter. We had an idea that infrastructure would be targeted during the winter, which it has been. And so part of that was for us to start procuring the generators for health clinics so they could at least have electricity and heating as the winter was to progress. And they have those are in place, and we're still distributing more of those. And I think personally, it's making sure our staff have, their emergency kits wherever they go, make sure we're as prepared as we can be, have as many layers as we can. And the various things like that when it comes to us going out, as well as our staff going out, brought in sleeping bags that go down to negative 30 degrees or whatever back in September or October. So a lot of that was us trying to think as much as we could about that happening as early as possible.
So one question we're getting, such a sort of a multi-part question, is that, escaping the war is almost unimaginable for the estimated 2.7 million people who are living with a disability. So many disability rights advocates feel the Ukrainian government and humanitarian groups have not done enough to help. So what does MTI do to help disabled Ukrainian refugees in Moldova and those people with disabilities that haven't been able to flee? And even more specifically, has MTI made efforts to mainstream disability inclusion in all of their programs and aid provisions? And how are they working to strengthen awareness, training, and advocacy efforts for staff serving people with disabilities?
That is a great question, whoever asked that. So thank you for that question. Medical Teams International, I think the key thing about our name is teams, because this is too much for one organization to respond to. And so we work in partnership, we work in teams with other agencies, whether it's UN agencies, government agencies, or other nonprofit organizations. And so, when we're dealing with specific needs of patients that we see, if we are not able to supply, for example, people with disabilities what they need, we then connect them, or we seek resources from other organizations that do. So that's one aspect of it. In terms of the question of, is it built into the fiber of our organization of prioritizing people with disabilities? I do want to say that Medical Teams, our board of directors, has established a diversity, equity, and inclusion policy that we are implementing. This happened a year ago with the policy, and it includes people with disabilities. And so this is something that we're on a journey on, and we're increasingly addressing the needs of people of various backgrounds and diversities, and that includes disability as well. So there's much more work to be done, but it is on our minds and in our actions and in our objectives.
And also to add, I think practically what we're practically doing as well. So we recognize that everyone currently doesn't have access to a primary healthcare center, especially those who may be disabled. And so one of our programs right now is also working with our local partner to have a mobile medical team so that we can go to them. And I think that is one of the ways we're also practically and actively trying to fill that gap where we can, by going to where people are, not expecting them to find your way to a primary healthcare center. Like let's try to meet you where you are.
So a question for you, and this gets back to the teams idea again, is Dnipro, for instance, has experienced a lot of shelling, many civilian victims in the invasion. For your work in places like Dnipro and Izmail, are you hiring local Ukrainians, or did you bring international staff with you to support that work?
Well, I think initially we brought in some people. I was also one of those people. But right now we have hired local staff who are, so they are the backbone of our programming. They are everything that, they're the reason why I think our programming is going so well and is so effective. Yeah.
I think it's actually a very good use of resources to hire locally. Ukrainians are very talented. There's no cultural barriers, there's no language barriers. And so they are able to implement tremendous programming. What they need is just support. And that's what we're able to bring them in order to ensure that they have the supplies that they need to carry on the work that they're so capable of doing.
So in terms of resources, how many resources are dedicated to mental health versus other services? And do you have resources set aside specifically for battle injuries?
I don't know about the battle injuries question. I do not think so, but yeah, I've never been asked the question. But as for resources, I think we don't have really anything split up. So mental health and psychosocial support is one aspect of our programming. And so for us, it's more of asking the team within the budget that we have, what do you need to have successful programming? And what can we get you to do that? And also just recognizing that as we move on, things have to change, right? So we noticed probably like a month ago, people don't always like just sitting together and talking. People want something different because there's only so much of talking about your trauma you can do. So also looking at what does that look like for our programming and changing that up. Does that mean we add different components into it as people come together? And so I think that's more of how we look at it when it comes to resources, but we could also always use more resources, but that's how it comes from a programming side of how we address what resources MHPSS might need versus our other programs.
Great.
And I will say, if I may add, we partner with agencies here in the U.S., the Ukrainian American Association of Southwest Washington, and also Emmanuel Mercy Mission. These are Ukrainian organizations that have been able to receive 40-foot container shipments. So we've sent 6 container shipments, 40 feet, filled with medicines and medical supplies and equipment to address some of those needs, some of those supply needs for battle injuries. And so to date, all 6 of those containers have been received in Ukraine and have been distributed. This is a value of over $6.1 million of supplies that have been distributed to clinics, to hospitals throughout the area of the country where the need is greatest. So again, the idea of team, the idea of partnering together in order to accomplish something that we couldn't do on our own. And it's been a wonderful way to support Ukrainian effort.
So you bring up organizations like the Ukrainian American Association, and one of our questions was from Tatiana Turdal, who I know is in our audience today. We have another question from someone about how to gather together materials that could be sent to Ukraine. And I'm wondering, Tatiana, perhaps if you can put in the chat how people might be able to get in touch with you, that is a really good bridge. There's so much happening locally that ends up influencing what is happening around the world. And this is one of the beautiful things about being an organization like World Oregon in a community like this, is that there are so many ripples and tentacles that connect to groups that are in the business of care and intercultural aid. So another question related to that, at the end of January 2023, I will be virtually teaching English to Ukrainian children who have been taken to the Republic of Russia, or Republic of Georgia, pardon me. What suggestions or tips might you give me so I better understand how they are feeling and coping?
First of all, I would say, Tim, that's great. That's a great effort. Glad you're doing this. And be patient. Allow them to make sure that you're listening to them, and allow them to tell their story. Now, they won't be able to do it in English since you're teaching the language, but relationship is incredibly important to Ukrainians. One of the things I learned about the culture, having traveled there years ago many times, was relationship is number one. I remember giving a gift, if I can divert a bit. I would give a gift to this pastor and his wife, elderly couple in Boyaka, just southwest of Kiev. And every time she put the gift in the cupboard and closed the door. And I was thinking, gosh, she didn't even open the gift. I went again, she did the same thing. So finally I asked her adult son, and I said, why is your mom not opening the gift? And she said, oh, she would never do that. She would never open the gift in front of you because it would be giving more attention to the gift than to the gift giver. And I thought, these are pearls of wisdom and cultural significance that we can all learn from. So relationship, Tim, build relationships with the children, listen to their stories, and let them learn more about you. And you'll find that they'll be more successful in school.
So for both of you who have been on the ground, what are the kinds of items that people you are caring for and that you're treating, what do they need? I mean, in terms of first aid or pre-hospital items, and are there other things that have come up that people have felt that they needed? That idea, as you said, that powerful Somali poem of leaving home. People leave with the things they carried. What sorts of things should people be thinking about in terms of donating or bringing together?
Yeah, my first thought is power, which can't just be given like, here's power for you. But yeah, so I think that's where our idea for generators has come from. I think that's probably the biggest thing I've heard personally, especially lately, of power, or for us in our team, it was power banks. So people still have a connection to power when the power goes out. And I would say outside of that, some of our we have gone through a lot of our medicines, so we're still procuring medicines, but we've gone through a lot of heart medicine, a lot of I'm trying to think of what others are the ones that we run out of really quickly, like naproxen and paracetamol always go quickly as well. But I would say, just from my perspective of being there and spending time with our programs, it's a little bit more biased when it comes to medical things or being out there when there is no power. So I think from my side, it's mostly been things of that nature, like power banks, medicines.
I think too, we need to think of it this way. Let's say we were required to leave home and cross into Canada with very little notice. And so we all may be taking medications, and yet we won't have our supply of medications or even the ability to get medications in the country where we're going. And so that's the situation. It's not necessarily that they're crossing the border with war wounds, but they do have needs, long-term needs for chronic illnesses that they're already been getting treatments for. Additionally, the other thing that we've been working on at the border when I was there was training Moldovan border guards on psychological first aid. This is a UN-sponsored curricula that is used to help people receive the refugees coming across in a way that's appropriate and helpful and not causing more harm. And so we went throughout the borders of Moldova and trained schools and teams of border patrol on psychological first aid.
So one of the questions, there seems to be a recurring theme coming from the audience, is what are the opportunities to volunteer either here or in Ukraine? And are there organizations locally? I mean, certainly MTI, the Ukrainian American Association. Are there other groups doing work that people could put their energies toward? And the chat was disabled. It is now enabled. If anyone would like to offer in the chat some local organizations doing that work. So are there other groups that MTI has partnered with locally that would be good organizations for people to contact?
I know in Moldova, we've been working with Coram Deo, which is a local Moldovan organization that we've actually started, medical team started. Immediately, we funded them in order to help distribute food in the country to refugees. There are other institutional partners that we're working with, the Moldovan government, health system. We don't want to create a separate health system. We want it mainstream into the existing system as we assist refugees. And so we're working very collaboratively there.
Was that local in Ukraine or local in Oregon? Oh, yeah. The question you were looking for.
Yeah, yes, and both.
Okay. Joe, I don't know if you want to talk to places in Oregon. People can.
Well, I think in Oregon, I would be looking for resettlement organizations. Refugees are coming into the country. More are coming into the U.S. is receiving more Ukrainian refugees. And I would look. I don't have any names to give you, but I would highly recommend assisting resettlement organizations in the Portland, Oregon area.
You know, when it comes to resettlement, and there are many different avenues for resettlement. What are you seeing in terms of humanitarian parole, which is very much temporary resettlement, versus permanent settlement paths?
Well, I mean, part of the issue is whether, if they're in Europe, Ukrainians in Europe, whether they want to actually resettle elsewhere, because as I've been saying and you've been hearing, they want to go home, and so there is that question about whether from the Ukrainian individual himself or herself, where is their next step, and that's where this uncertainty takes place, with the hope that they will eventually be able to go home.
So I know that neither of you are in charge of, geopolitical finagling and negotiations, but what is your take on how the war is being reported from the ground? And what are you hearing, and what based on your experience, what is the short and long-term outlook from those on the front lines over there?
I can start. I think the morale is quite high, and it's actually quite, like, it makes you quite proud, even as a non-Ukrainian, of how well they're handling it. because war sucks wherever you are, but also just when areas are newly accessible or newly liberated, just the morale of we're gonna do it, we're gonna make it, and you can't help but agree that hopefully the war will come to an end soon, and I think that that mentality happens a lot, and that happens not only in we're going to wait to celebrate something until after the war, which I hear a lot. We're not celebrating this year, but we're going to celebrate next year when the war is over. But also just how much they support the military and their soldiers. And that comes through a lot when you're on the ground too.
So, Patty, you're about to return to Ukraine for the third time.
Yes.
And a couple of things have come up. Somebody asked this earlier in one of the questions. How are you keeping MTI staff and support groups safe? And we were all talking before the program started on the heroic work you all do, but how one balances the work of responding to aid and trauma and also taking care of the people who are delivering the aid. And I'm wondering if you could talk about that a bit.
Sure. I think especially when you're a leader that is in charge of other people's safety, you take that to a really high extreme of keeping your people safe. And part of that is day by day security updates from our security manager, as well as speaking to him multiple times a day of, has anything even slightly changed in the narrative that we know right now, and how has that changed daily, but also on the overall aspect of security, as well as paying attention to so in Dnipro and countrywide, you have sirens that go off that are kind of a pre-warning, but yeah. So listening to those, making sure you're aware of where you are when those go off. And I think kind of similar to preparing for winter, it's preparing yourself when you get there to not become complacent, to convince your staff, this happens every day. I don't get sleep I tend to sleep through a lot of the sirens, but between 12 to 4, we know sirens going to go off. Don't, most likely in Dnipro, don't get complacent with certain things. Like, just remember that safety is our top priority for our staff.
I think too, it's important to create a culture organizationally, and we're doing this at medical teams, where we are looking at staff care and staff well-being. We're talking about it. We're allowing and encouraging people to say, I need to have a break. And we're even factoring in and creating break opportunities for staff. We have to do our best work to people who deserve it the most. And we can't when we ourselves are stretched and overwhelmed and unwell. And so we want to make sure that, from a physical, emotional, and spiritual way, that we're caring for our staff.
So one thing that comes up when we see global crisis emerge is oftentimes knowing how to navigate who is doing good work, and where are you seeing people profiting from that crisis in an untoward way. So I'm curious, are you encountering any issues or allegations of corruption that impedes your work on the ground there? And what advice would you give to people in terms of vetting or knowing that the people that they're donating to are in fact getting the aid where it's going?
I think that's a really good question. And I know it happens, and I've been in the sector long enough to know it does. I know for us, I haven't seen any of that, and I'm not just saying that because I'm on a webinar, but I think that's something we take really seriously, at least for medical teams. And kind of like Joe said, we have a lot of trainings for, if you see something when it comes to fraud for us, say something, or even with a different organization, we want to know, and how can we handle that. And so just for me, to be honest, because we're kind of short-staffed at the time. So with us being with that happening, I was mostly focused on MTI. And so I know that happens with other organizations, but I would recommend Charity Navigator or other organizations who really look at a lot of different factors when it comes to an organization, rating them on various transparencies and looking at are they transparent in financial or in how they treat their staff. And I think also part of that is also finding an organization that deals with what you're really interested in. I know I saw something about food. If that's what you really want to contribute to, I feel like you will put in more effort to research if it's something that's really true to your heart. And so I would also recommend finding something that you really want to give to, and then doing the research on that. And I think that might come up with some things.
Yeah, I just want to add to, at medical teams, we take accountability very seriously. And so I would recommend looking at audits. And we have an audit, not only an internal audit, but an external audit regularly. We also have an electronic reporting system that staff worldwide have access to. If they see something, as Patty has said, if you see something that's not right, they can report it. And then it comes to our system here, and everything that we receive is investigated to ensure that supplies are going where they need to go, that we're getting quotes properly, quotes and jobs that we're asking to be done locally. It's all taken into consideration and investigated whenever a report comes in.
Right. So you mentioned food, and that it brings up, and there's so much that comes out of this. And one of the big issues we've seen with the war has been the effect it's having on food security, not just in Russia and Ukraine, but because they are such exporters of things like wheat, we're seeing the ripple effect of that in the Middle East and in countries in Africa. So, and yet at the same time, we're seeing things like Jose Andres with the World Central Kitchen on the ground feeding, hundreds of thousands of people. How is the food security or food insecurity playing out, and is that challenging how you're able to treat and give aid to folks?
Food is, if it's available in certain places, especially I'm thinking of the Horn of Africa, they've been highly impacted by this war. If it's not available, then it's extremely expensive. So it might as well not be available. So even World Food Program agencies that are there to help ensure that there isn't acute malnutrition, they're having difficulty accessing food. And then, of course, the cost of acquiring the food has increased. So we're seeing some astronomical numbers, some frightening numbers on acute malnutrition in the Horn of Africa. And let me just say another thing that this crisis has caused. As horrible as it is, and this is horrible, and the world needs to respond to what's happening in Ukraine, but there are also neglected crises that continue to go on in the world. The DR Congos, the Sudan, Ethiopia, these have been going on for many, many years, and resources are lessened to respond to those crises because they're not in the headlines. And so the rippling effects of what's happened in Ukraine is impacting, as I said earlier, the entire world.
Great. Anything you'd like to add to that, Patty?
As someone who I responded to the 2011 famine in Somalia, so I very much echo that from which Joe said about especially the Horn of Africa, as it's naturally dear to my heart from that.
Well, and Joe, you bring up a really important topic, and certainly I think about this a lot as somebody who programs conversations for a global organization. You don't want to you don't want to pit crises against one another. It's important for us to hold all of these things in our hands and figure out where we can do the good work and ask the right questions and offer appropriate aid and response. So I really appreciate you bringing that up, because I hear this from other people of, oh, you're spending all your time here and you're spending all your time there when this is going on. And the fact is, we live in a very, very complex global environment. And all the more reason that we need to look at those issues of balancing rule of law and human rights, and make sure that people are getting fed and that food, clothing, and shelter are hand in hand with dignity wherever they can be. So I think it's really important to put these things in perspective and understand that it is ongoing. I really admire the work that MTI has been doing, and both Joe and Patty, I thank you for being so focused on healing and healing those who are suffering. We're kind of coming up on time. We have fewer questions. If Derek is back, I'm going to bring Derek back on to take us out into the afternoon, and there he is. So Joe and Patty, thanks so much for your time and your energy and your good thoughts. Please be safe as you're helping those around the world, and we will hopefully see you soon.
Well said, Tim. And yes, just adding my thanks to Joe and Patty. Encourage you to support Medical Teams International in their work. I'm going to post again in the chat the link for those of you who are interested in doing so, as well as links for the World Oregon donate page and the World Oregon events page. We had a lot of great events coming up here and then tomorrow and next week, and encourage you to get engaged in those. Look for this program up on YouTube later that you can share with friends or family who didn't get a chance to join today. Patty, Joe, any last words before we wrap up?
I just want to thank you very much for allowing us to highlight the work of medical teams and the needs in Ukraine. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to be able to talk about just a country that I've grown to love so much over the past couple of months, and just to talk about the programs that we have happening.
Great. Well, thanks both of you. And I see some participants have posted some other interesting links in the chat for organizations working with refugees in the Portland area. So thanks everyone for joining us today. Stay safe, stay healthy, and happy holidays.